My name's James Fredrickson. It's my pleasure today to be able to moderate and to introduce Rob Sheldrick, who is from an organisation called Endeavour. I'm going to talk about Endeavour in a moment, but before I do that, I'd like to maybe just welcome Rob. And before I pass it across to Rob, Rob's a veteran of the wholesale distribution and supply chain industries. He started his career with Australia's, what was then Australia's largest food producing company, Goldman Fielder, and then more recently he's been delivering modernisation and transformation for other companies such as Qantas, Uncle Toby, Steggles, Amcor, Darrell Lee. There's been quite a few. He's got a real passion for working with businesses to ensure that they're future fit and ready to exploit leading edge business practices and technology that is still to come. So, Rob, thanks very much for your time today. Rob represents an organisation called Endeavour. Endeavour, for those of you that are not familiar, they're really in the business of transforming organisations into what the owners and their leadership teams imagine they can be. And so they achieve results through expert application of world-leading business management software solutions and have over 20 years of real-world industry experience. So it's a real pleasure to be joined by Rob. Endeavour have proven that they can work across businesses to deliver systems and process transformation in ways that create significant operational efficiencies as well as increasing profits. So, Rob, with all of that, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you, James.
So, Rob, I guess what I would maybe start by asking, if it's okay, is that over the last few, couple of years, there's been so many upheavals, and for most of us, the impacts on changes are being felt. Can you maybe talk through a few of those upheavals and what you're seeing within businesses over the journey?
Yeah, sure. So I think just a statement up front, we've all been through the COVID experience the last couple of years. One thing I personally have recognised is that it was a very different experience for many businesses. And we used to talk about 2-speed economies, but I reckon COVID introduced 8-speed economies. And one thing that I noticed regularly was that the same industry set actually experienced the COVID world differently. Some prospered, some struggled, and some made some very quick pivots, as the favourite word used to be. So the things that have stood out the last couple of years, but again, aren't just about the last couple of years. Some of these things have been norms for many years. Is clearly there's some big things happening in the world that we have to react to. So most recently, we're all aware of the tensions with Ukraine, gas and energy and so on. But there's been other things that have impacted us in the last few years where people have had to recognise that, manufacturing, for example, that it all moved offshore meant that there wasn't stuff onshore when we needed it fast enough. So one thing that happened in Australia is people got used to longer lead times. That's just the reality in the world. And that introduced some interesting challenges because some people would accept that. So some businesses really enjoyed that ability to sort of add to that lead time and shore up some of the other problems they had and hide them away, where other businesses just, they lived on being the person that got it to you just in time. So that their presence was less as such in the market. Look, clearly controlling and managing costs in a time of upheaval when there's, whether it be COVID or whatever else, is really big. So a lot of organisations needed to really get on top of their numbers and understand the decisions they took for the next 6 months or the next year. So tactical reactions. But further than that, there was this concept of getting ready to bounce back. So we all knew there was an end to what was going on the last couple of years, whatever that end looked like. So many people were structuring themselves to be ready to take advantage of what was happening. So that created its own challenges. Did I have the right business model to do that and so on? Competition's an interesting one. I think clearly maybe 10, 15 years ago, you could guess where your competition was going to come from. Today, Airtasker is a great example. Do you reckon that plumbers were sitting there a few years ago thinking that this put a quote up online and somebody's going to respond to you in 20 minutes was going to be around? So, we've all got to make our businesses work around different competition that it's coming through. I think supply chain shocks, both because of what happened in COVID, but other things have been a big thing. So the biggest one I've experienced is talking to organisations that rely on timber. Timber's been bloody hard to get hold of. So there's been a couple of things around that. You've got people that are building houses, construction industry, etc., who just could not buy the timber they wanted to. But again, the lead time conversation came up. So you had to be very on top of your numbers and very clear on what your inventory situation was, even if you were talking something 2 months out, because if you weren't, somebody else was pinching that opportunity from you. I think the buyer behaviour is a big one, and I think it's actually, it comes up a lot in conversations, but I have to almost drill in to find this conversation. People just need to be aware that buyers are savvier. Apple has changed the way that people go onto a website and want to buy product. It's glossy, it's clear, and that pervades through everything they do. But I think also, I'm towards the older age, I guess, but the younger people coming through, they expect more. The experience of when they go to a shop, either bricks and mortar or onto an actual website, they want more. So I used to sell a web solution as part of an ERP a few years ago, and I'd say it's good and cheap and it's industrial looking. You can't do that today. People expect more, they want more, and they'll pay for more. So if you're not delivering what they want to a reasonable level, they'll go elsewhere. So that's a really important thing. And I think just to round that out, staffing challenges, like we clearly all understand today that things are happening. And look, a great example was I heard a story this week about a farmer in South Australia had brought in some people from overseas, put them on a bus, were paying them. The farm next to him actually stopped the bus and paid them more and took them into his farm. There's immense challenges now around staffing. So you can't stop that, but what you can do is set your business up to make it attractive for people to work with you as such. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail. And then finally, there's increasing statutory stuff going on. So SDP is a great example. If anybody's unclear, that's about the government wanting to get more data from you. Those things are being imposed on you, but there's a number of things that continue down that space. So I think wrapping all that up, we've got to deal with all those things and live in a world that's always on. And this is probably the bit for me that's really important. People don't necessarily expect you to be there 24/7, but they expect you to be something always on. So what that means is bots have been introduced to the world where you go on a website and it pretends to be a person responding to somebody at 12:05 at midnight. And the reality is more people are doing things after they come home from work. So we need to think about that. So I hope that helps a bit, James.
Yeah, look, it does. And I want to touch in a minute maybe on some of the areas that organisations need to be focused on. But before I just cover that, I guess from an organisation level, what I'd be really interested to understand, systems perspective within these organisations, where do you see some of the fall downs and the challenges that the businesses are facing just from systems to be able to actually control the things that you just mentioned?
Yeah. I think the one thing I see the most when I go out and see people is they're, I don't want to say they're lying to themselves, but they're almost kidding themselves that their current world is okay because they fumble through being able to connect the things they need to connect, putting a sales through the inventory line, getting it out on a truck, and it works. But the reality is it's a bit like the home loan conversation. A couple of % of extra revenue actually puts a lot of pressure on the business. So for me, I think the biggest thing is have a platform from which you can grow. So get that sustainable. And, I'll talk about it later on, but I ask questions of businesses all the time about if you double your revenue size, how would you handle that? Because it's not just about people, it's about actually having a process that isn't impacted. So, where you can automate, that's what you want to be doing, and then focus people on adding value.
Okay. Well, so with that, let's talk about, the sorts of things that organisations need to be focused on. You've put a few here, but maybe you can articulate that and then we can, sort of dive into a couple of the other areas a bit further.
Yeah, so just touching on that, if you doubled your revenue, that's the scalability conversation. So that isn't about do you have the funds to actually handle it? It's about, do you have a warehouse that's big enough to handle double the stock? Do you have an overflow strategy? But more importantly, do you have the systems that allow you to take those orders and make sure you meet the needs? Or if you're a service organisation, can you actually make sure you plan the routes out now when you've got double the effort going on a Tuesday, etc. So, you need to make that scalable, as well as functional scalability, where, maybe the old days was fine. You had one channel, you went out and had a guy on the road that sold something. But today, people want to approach the same company, have the same experience through different mechanisms. So whether that be online, give you a phone call, or whether that be talk to your rep. So we need to be able to support that extra grunt, if you like, around the functionality. Agility and flexibility is obvious. So I guess we've all seen that in the last couple of years. But the flexibility is a really important point for me, that it's really about things are going to change that you don't have control of. And EDI, I think, is a reasonable example for people that are doing commerce to Coles or Woolworths. Those guys have been doing EDI, electronic data interchange, for ages and automating that process. But there are still companies that don't do that with them today and are surprised when they grow to a size that suddenly they have to put that in place. So, for me, it's about having those things in place before they ask you to do it so you can control that conversation. Frictionless processes, just to touch on that, because that's one that's really important to me. It's where things don't add to the process. They don't add to the customer value that you're delivering. You want to remove those, or you want to automate those. So a great example for me is AP invoices, where you've got supplier payments. I deal with companies that go to trouble of putting a purchase order process in place. They have a two-tiered approval step where maybe the sales manager and the managing director have to approve something. And then for some strange reason, on the other end, when they get the supplier invoice, they go and have another approval process. It's crazy. What you need to do is you've done all the upfront approvals. If it's within your parameters, just pay it, or set the timing for the payment for when you're ready to approve to pay. You can automate those processes. So efficiency speaks for itself. We obviously want to drive that. But I think the real-time insights is the other really critical one for me. I'm a big believer, and this is nothing that I've developed. This is science and studies out there, that if you know something has broken or gone wrong, the closer to that event happening, the more likelihood you have of actually doing something about it. So what I mean by that is having solutions and processes that don't wait till the end of the week to say you couldn't supply a stock item, but tell you 5 minutes after or instantaneously that you couldn't supply a stock item. You have an opportunity to go back to that customer in this example and say, I have an alternative. Even better, at the time the order's being placed, have the solution propose the alternative for the person that's working at it. So I think there's a few things that are in there. The other one I'll just finalise on is staff productivity. We want to actually make our people more productive. And I'll talk later about people, but it is not about having a whip that's big enough to make them work harder, because they'll get you 5%. It's really about empowering those people and providing the solutions that make them not only happier, but able to achieve things. And we know from studies that people want to actually have a place in organisations. They want to be able to achieve things. So, one of the best examples for me is if you've got a service industry, for example, you want to actually follow up your clients. You want to talk to them about what's stock on hand, if they want stock, what the last appointment was. So you want that person before the phone call to have all the information available to them at hand. And guess what? The guy receiving the conversation goes, hey, they know about me, that I'm actually important, versus what did you order last time, buddy? Or what did I do for you last time? So that stuff flows back to the individual, not only being productive, but actually feeling like they play a role.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. That's good. Some great points there. I suppose talking about point solutions and fully integrated solutions, and I think, we've got a slide prepared for it, but, really, what is it, in your opinion, which one of those becomes the best one to consider for a business? So
I work with a pretty simple view of the world. Is that you should always do something until you can't. So the example in that for this discussion is, I think you're obviously better off with one single unified solution that actually meets the challenges of your organisation. The point solution comes in when that's not always true, and there are exceptions to that. So if I start with the point solution part of the conversation, I think often it's accidental, to be honest, that people have a need. So they're sitting here day one with a finance solution like Xero, for example, and suddenly they go, I've decided to get into e-commerce. I don't want to replace Xero. I'm busy doing stuff. What's out there? And they'll find another thing that does inventory and e-commerce, and they'll connect it. and they'll think it's really connected, but it's not. It's just an integration point, and some data comes across and so on. So, I call it the accidental because they just haven't had chance to think ahead. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody hasn't invested their soul into making the add-on bit work as such. And it doesn't mean it doesn't work well at all. It's just over time, it holds you back and constrains you, where a unified solution will give you more options to do things. I think also that there's an argument around mature markets that's out there. I don't believe it, but I'm going to put it up anyway, where people will say, I'm in a market, nothing much changes, my systems are fine, they were fine 10 years ago. I would actually argue out, though, that that's the perfect world for people to go into and disrupt and do things differently. And I worked with a faster company a long time ago, who were very adamant that everything they had was fine and their current customer base was never going to change. And not long afterwards, Bunnings come into play, and it just changed the whole world as such. Now, their systems couldn't keep up, and they were chasing the tail rather than actually being ahead of the change to go and fix that up. So I think the other thing that where it does make sense is, and there are highly specialised niche solutions out there. So I'll use an example that's in my world today. There are very good allied health solutions that are very targeted around what a doctor does in his practice, and some of them are actually called best practice as such. ERP solutions right now don't offer that link to Medicare, appointment-driven stuff. There's less of those solutions, though, over time, and I would bet almost anything that in 5 or 6 years' time, that will be available in a one single solution. So there are some reasons in there. There's some cons to consider, though. Point solutions do come with a higher cost. When you're running multiple systems and making them talk to each other, there's a lot of hidden costs that people don't appreciate. There's a lot of fixing up things that break along the way. And it's funny how you go into some businesses and that becomes a job for somebody to make sure that's there. There's little things, like I know an inventory system that works with Xero, for example, does not value the way that you calculate foreign exchange the same way. And you end up with differences in the value of inventory in the inventory system versus what's in the financial system. And for those people that do a lot of purchasing from overseas, landed costs, etc., it adds up as a real big problem to solve. I think there's other issues around how systems talk to each other. So an example I have is a labour hire. Two customers I have today that work with point solutions on labour hire, and the ERP becomes the financial solution, but they don't get the invoice detail across into the financial system. The financial system is charged with chasing the money, making sure the bills are paid. And the first conversation that actually happens from the account point of view, the customer is saying, well, just go through again, what did that person do when they came out and we used their labour resource? And they don't have that at hand. They've got to go get a manual process to get that. Why does that happen? Because the point solution just can't send out information of that detail. There's no reason for them, and this is a really important message I put out there. The point solutions don't have a reason to try and improve that. They improve that, they make the ERP or the bigger solution look better, so that they actively don't do those things. Does that make sense, James?
Yeah, it does. It does. Makes a lot of sense. And then maybe just moving across into a fully integrated solution, maybe the benefits of that. We've got about 10 minutes in the main session left before we've got questions. Again, just reminding the audience, but please, by all means, ask as many questions as you can. We'll get to as many as we can. But this particular point, I think, is pretty important, Rob. If you could just cover that point solution. Certainly, I think there's some great benefits there in part, but there's also some real challenges. But the fully integrated solutions, I guess, is what you're seeing a lot of people steering towards. Is that right?
Absolutely. And personally, I think it's the best way to go unless you have a reason not to. And that's a really important message for me. I think there's a greater adoption, and that's sped up in the last couple of years around this place, because I think what we've seen out in the market with the customers that I talk to, they're not all going to be a Qantas that I've dealt with in the past. So let's be blunt, they can fund whatever they want at that level, But even the larger 1 billion company are looking at this situation now of bringing everything into one solution where possible. But the guys we're talking to today, absolutely should be focused on that from my point of view. And the reasons that are, and I'm going to use the ERP word for the first time today because that's the best example of a fully integrated solution, is that, at its core, an ERP or enterprise resource planning solution, but that probably doesn't hang as true anymore, is a suite of applications that automates business processes, provides insights and internal controls. Now, an ERP is the only thing, or a fully integrated solution is the only thing that can do this, having all the information at hand to be able to do that. And it does that by having a central database that collects inputs from multiple departments or multiple functions or transactions, but in the same way. So the points for me that are important is it's one clear and consistent view of the business, but with many perspectives. So sometimes people think, if we align all our business together, we'll lose our thing. So I work for Goodman Fielder, as you mentioned earlier, James, and one of my tasks was to go out at a time when DIFOT, delivered in full on time, was the way that everybody measured how well you went or how well you serviced Coles or Woolworths or Franklin's at the time, etc. But I had 11 divisions, and between them, they had 5 different views of that. And at the top level, the board was saying, we want to get to a certain percentage and the same metric and all that, but the actual calculations were all different. And guess what happens? The ones that had calculations that were easier and made them look better had 90-odd%. The ones that maybe had real calculations might have been sitting at 70%. They just weren't measuring the same thing the same way. That's to me what a fully integrated system allows you to do, is align everybody in the same direction and make sure we're on point for the goal. Business decisions are based on the same data then. So one of the key things that I grew up with in my earlier days was I would do my own reports and some other sales guy would do his own reports, and we put our views together. And what I called a certain industry set was based on the product was sold. And what he would call the industry set was based on the customers he serviced. And we're both talking about retail sales. So we need to, again, have the same data building up to the same view. I can't underline this enough, the real-time element here. I talked earlier about you want to know when something goes wrong or when something's happening so you can jump in and do something immediately or automate that reaction. You need real-time data. So, if you're in e-commerce and you think that somebody going onto an e-commerce shop now, wherever they are in Australia or the world, is okay to say, send me an email back later on in 24 hours if you've got the stock, you're kidding yourself. They want to make a decision at the time. They want to be told, do you have this stock? Do you have what I'm asking for? And if you don't, what are the other alternatives I might consider before I walk away? That's the most obvious. And I still talk to businesses today that have their e-commerce solution manually updated through a spreadsheet or something else. And even if it's every hour, it's not up to date and it causes problems. Automation is key. We talked about that a little bit already. But what I mean by that is take the things that are both important and repeatable and automate them as much as possible. There's a heck of a lot of things now that sit as a natural automation in solutions like ERP solutions, where it's not automated, it's just the way the system works. When something happens, it automatically puts that into the CRM functionality and registers an email has come back from a customer, for example. That's not automation, it's just the way it works. But on top of that, you can build rules. If these things happen, where do we go with this? What do we do with that? And they're really important. So I think workflow and alerting for me are really important. They're having visibility that something can be worked on, but also dashboards. So a lot of people talk to me about reporting, and I immediately say, "Do you need a report? Well, wait for that. Why not have a dashboard that gives you a list of actions you need to take?" And systems that are fully unified or fully integrated allow you to do that. And then finally, by having one integrated solution, the one thing you don't lose is the ability to drill through, to actually look into a problem and work your way through the different levels. So, if you're sitting there collecting cash, they can ask you questions. You can drill into the invoice. You might even be able to drill into some information around the distribution, understand what was go on, etc. But that's empowering to individuals. If they can follow a train and find out what the answer was, it's great. You can only do that efficiently and effectively in a single unified solution. So I hope that, again, makes sense, James.
It does. Yeah, it does. I suppose you would say that trying to get a single source of truth is really important within any organisation. You talked about being able to get lots of data coming into it in a particular environment, and from there to be able to use it most effectively. Can you maybe talk about how, these types of platforms, I mean, you say the word guarantee. I think organisations sometimes hear the word guarantee, they're not really sure that they can actually achieve that. But maybe talk about the readiness and the ability to be able to get that single point of truth into systems that then actually deliver the efficiency that they're looking for.
Yeah, no, look, there's no doubt I've had a lot of time to have these conversations with very customers that have gone through change and so on. And whilst there isn't an absolute guarantee, there is an absolute understanding out there that by doing these things, you put yourself in the best place to actually service your customers, your requirements today, and the changes that may come at you. So I'll give you a very quick example of that. Today, these solutions build in leading practices. Look, let's be honest, how you chase money through the AR side of things probably is not going to be an IP differentiator between you and your competitors and so on. So that stuff, follow the dotted lines, etc. But what you then can do by having the playbook inbuilt in the solution around how to do those things is focus on the things that do differentiate you. And that's a strategy conversation and such. I think there's also a point about having these things in place releases personnel and energy inside the organisation to actually improve the organisation. Today, when we're talking about guarantee conversation, what I can guarantee you is you're doing a lot of stuff to stop the dam breaking as well. And you may not see it; it might be at different levels. But by releasing those people to focus on what you can improve on, and more importantly, what's going to add to the value of the organisation, that's really what we're after doing. I think just to finalise, and mindful of the time, immediate clear feedback is important. The old story is very clear. If you can't see what's going on and you've got to wait a month to see what happened in your business, it's probably too late. So having that immediacy, getting the clear information back, gives you really all the tools that I think start allowing you to maybe not have the guarantee, but actually handle what comes at you.
Parts around compliance, security data, but also just generally about automation and the fear that people have that once you start to be able to put these systems in place and automate processes, that suddenly they're losing control of their business, and that they're experiencing challenges, again, regarding these kinds of areas. Could you just touch on those a little and maybe allay any fears of the leaders on call today that they shouldn't be concerned necessarily about those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that conversation is asking people to step back and take your hands off things is really, it's scary. I get that. But actually it's the opposite. When you automate things, you have a consistency to what's happening. You understand the rules behind the automation, and it actually gives you more control because you've got confidence in those automation steps doing what they need to do to actually then allow you to analyze what's happening. So, a great example for me in automation is credit limits. You decide you want to have some credit limits in place. You don't need people to be involved in that. If you've decided you've got $1 million credit limit, then the order doesn't go out. But it can be routed to somebody who can override that decision as part of the automation. And if there's a credible reason, so I know some companies deal with stock that's on the coming in from overseas on the containers. It's pre-purchased, so it sits in the credit limit, hasn't been paid. The customer's not due to pay for 6 months. So there are allowances in the models that can handle that. But I think that's a good example of you still have control, you still have visibility of what's going in the business. And again, I would go back and say, for me, the experience I see out there and what I've seen personally is actually more control. By having the right automation in the right places, having trust and confidence in the processes that are being delivered allows you to actually walk away and just, maybe get dashboard reports. And so a lot of the CEOs or MDs in these organizations, my experience, actually step away from the day-to-day transactional side of the business and focus on running the business.
Okay, and then I suppose let's address the elephant in the room before we go into main questions for the audience is the people question. It's clear that people, organisations are finding it more and more difficult to get skilled resources. That's presenting challenges. So I guess if we take some of the things that you've mentioned and take that a little further, fully integrated systems and abilities to be able to get, operation efficiency, what does that actually mean then to organisations with their current employees and ones that they're thinking about bringing on in such a market as we're going to be facing not only today, but probably I think we would all expect at least for the next 12 months or more.
Yeah, I don't think anything's changed here from a change management conversation, that you need to take people on the journey. I just can't underline that enough, that I suffer from this sometimes, and I look back and go, I didn't take that group with me. Businesses need to empower their people through this process. So first of all, making the journey part of theirs is actually what people want. There's been plenty of research over the years, last 10 years, around the people coming through, the younger cohort, if I want to say that. They're not just after money. They're actually after meaningful work. They want to matter. So what this is about for me is that's exactly what we're talking about. Having a single unified solution actually allows people to do meaningful work, first of all. So you automate the stuff that's not meaningless, but maybe drudgery and so on, and you let them focus on actually things that are going to add to that value to the business. You provide them a solution that actually is up to date. It looks like you want to use it, versus the green screens that some people still have, or a clunky solution that was built for a specific solution. So people want that. They want to enjoy that. And when you talk about scalability, we don't want to break people. So by having the solutions that allow us to scale doesn't actually mean that Henry or Tom or Jenny has to hang back till 9 o'clock every night to catch up. I spoke to a betting company just a couple of weeks ago. They have somebody that gets up at 4 o'clock every morning, every day, to make sure they get the runs set for the trucks, because they haven't got a system that can handle that. And that's fantastic till that person leaves, or when that person actually has enough, etc. You shouldn't have to do that. Look, there'll always be something that people have to fill a gap. I don't want to undermine that, but it's something we need to improve. So my view of the world is that, given what's going on at the moment, if you think your people are doing manual tasks at the moment and they're just keeping the cogs moving, or they think that rather than you think that, they really need to make a difference. And if they aren't happy, they're going to be going elsewhere, because money is the only thing that's going to be the differentiator. So we need to find other things, the experience at work, to be the differentiator. Otherwise, it will only be money. And I don't know too many businesses that are going to win that conversation if it's just money.
Couldn't agree with you more. Okay, well, look, I mean, they were really the main ones, I think, that we had. From a session perspective, I've got a couple of questions here that I wanted to ask. How big does my organisation need to be before it becomes worthwhile investing in a fully integrated environment?
There is no size. So I think if you look at a very, let's call it a startup organisation, for want of a word, that maybe has 2 users that are going to use the system, there is an answer for that. So there's definitely a smaller business model, which allows you to start with, say, financials first and get that right. But what you're doing is putting in a solution that will grow later on to include other functionality within the same solution. So my answer is, it's not about the size, it's about the value that we actually can agree is going to be in the solution. Now, obviously, if you're sitting there as a $10 million business today, or a $20 million business, whatever, if you've run with, say, Xero or one of those smaller business solutions, and you've got some point solutions running around that, it's, again, not going to be the conversation about the size of the business. It's going to be the impact that it would make by having one solution. But you always got to be looking to the future. The conversation absolutely is about where you go in the next 5, 10 years, or even 2 weeks for that matter. And that's the driver. Are you ready to go when you're called on?
The timing, how long does it take to be able to implement a system where they've got point solutions for the moment, but they're actually looking to potentially go into a fully integrated solution? How arduous is it? How difficult is it?
Yeah, so when I meet people the first time and I don't know all the context of that, my response is generally 3 to 6 months. We'll need to understand that. We can do it in a month. If it's just a finance-driven conversation, we can do that quite quickly. The bigger issue is on the customer side of, can you free up good people to be working on that project as well? But I never sit there a year later and talk to somebody about a project where they go, oh my God, I can't believe how long it took, or what was involved. The conversation is always, yeah, we did that. Now we're actually doing these things and focusing on what we're doing moving ahead.
Can I automate things like accounts receivable using a fully
Absolutely. And in
integrated
fact,
system?
that's the area I would focus on. In fact, accounts receivable and accounts payable are the most obvious ones. I think maybe about 10 years ago, it was in vogue to try and bureau out some of these things and outsource it and so on. That'd be one. If you're outsourcing to somebody that sort of stuff, they're just automating it on their side. So that is exactly where we focus a lot of effort.
If the equivalent of a smartphone or some radical piece of technology comes into an industry and comes in that tomorrow, what happens if you've already integrated a system, put it in place? How do you adapt the new technology to be able to take advantage of it?
Yeah, so a good question. I think it's if you've got a point solution, that's a harder conversation because, as I said earlier, there's actually reasons why these point solutions don't want to adopt everything that's out there. They want their siloed solution to stand up on its own feet, and they're a little bit slower on the uptake. Whereas the fully integrated solutions out there, it's in their best interest to adopt, things that are coming through the chain and look at things. So if the new technology is coming through, and the mobile phone is an obvious one because now people actually like to work on the landscape of mobile phone. I look at it and go, oh my God, how the hell do you do all these task-driven things on a little phone? But for about 50% of the workforce, that's all they've known. They've come through with that. So as soon as they're there, I think there are a lot of things coming through that we're all watching at the moment and understanding. And, AI is one of those things that people claim to know and understand, artificial intelligence, but in reality, it's been put in so many places for the last 5 years, you wouldn't even know about it. So there will be more things coming through. But again, a fully integrated solution it's in its best interest to keep adding on the next technology that comes out. That makes sense.
So someone's got an integrated system, but it might be weak in a particular area or function, and then there's another solution, whether that be a point solution or that has wider functionality that may be specific to that organisation or industry. What's your suggestion, and how can it be used to be able to be integrated into the system that you've already invested heavily in, or can it be? I guess is the question.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And so it's the same view I have where wherever possible you should have a fully integrated solution. However, for your nuanced need, there may be a reason where a point solution makes sense. It's a niche solution. We just need to challenge though. Is it I found something that looks a bit sexier, or my mate down the road uses and it does the job 10% better? This is not a conversation about finding the best functional thing all over the place. This is about recognizing the value when you have the functional needs all put together in one solution. So the best example I have is CRM. If we understand what you're trying to do with a CRM, and my example would be capture information, interactions with customers, understand who in their organization we're talking to, get emails back that respond to us and capture that and put it in there. That's a fully integrated system. Is that as good as some of the other things like HubSpot and out there might be? It's pretty close, but there are some reasons why these niche point solutions are seen as good choices. I just think people have to understand, and we do this when we talk with you, right? You lose value by getting the thing that is better sometimes. And it's the overall gain that we're trying to achieve here, because in 3 or 4 years' time, those things that you actually think are better in that other solution, the niche solution, are more likely to be in our solutions anyway, in the fully integrated world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think probably pivotal to the conversation, because there's always going to be bells and whistles and everything, but if you look at the business holistically, what is it that you're actually trying to achieve? And if you're getting massive efficiencies by having a fully integrated system that is doing everything or lots of the things that you need, those little bells and whistles probably don't mean as much as the efficiency gain and operational efficiencies that you gain when you've got something that's solved right across the organisation. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, James, what I like to say to people is, as a team managing the company and also the people on the journey in the organisation, you need to be aligned in the same direction, because there is going to be some things that are harder for some people than yesterday in going to a fully integrated, but the overall gain for the business is worthwhile.
Okay, makes sense. I'll throw this one as the last question just before we wrap up. Can I merge information from things like sensors on my shop floor with my financial information? Might be too specific, but one of the other questions I thought might be of interest because just of the industry type and its delivery into financials.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because it's actually one of the advantages that you find with, for me, larger solutions or more holistic solutions, that they need to enable things like APIs to be able to transact information. And when we think about shop floor, and I spent a number of years with a manufacturing software organisation that used to be the domain of the guy with a blue coat that came in and just focused on that. And somehow you got that information at a high level into, the main solution. Today, we actually want to connect those. So that's part of that information immediacy that I was talking about earlier, that if there's activity at the shop floor around capacity that's, constraining an organisation producing something, you actually want that information to come up into the overall view. Yes, you can have a production manager that might go walking past that machine or into the cockpit in the manufacturing area, but it's not the same as having the flow and impacts of that constraint. So two bits to that answer. There's technology that supports being able to do that, and then it becomes use of information is enabled, I guess, within a holistic solution.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Rob. Again, I really sincerely appreciate your time, and certainly for everyone that's attended today, taking time out of their day to attend. Thanks again for your time, Rob. Certainly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thank you to everybody.